back to my workshop. Today we're going to be turning another one of these. It's a workshop sketch pencil, and this was turned out of green synthetic burl that I got from Pen Kits Direct. But today we're going to turn another one, and we're going to make it out of Elm Burl. I was lucky enough to be given a few nice chunks of Elm Burl taken from a freshly cut tree, so it's still quite green, but we're going to select a nice piece of it and we're going to make another sketch pencil. And so here I have the piece I've selected. It looks like it has some nice grain. There's a few little cracks and what looks like bits of rot, but hopefully we'll be able to take this to the bandsaw and cut it into a nice pen blank. Okay, so here we have our two brass barrels that will make up our pen, and the total length of them is 90mm. So we're going to try and get a blank out of this piece of burr that's 100mm long, so that we can have a nice bit either end of the barrels to trim flush with the barrel trimmer. And it's a 10mm tube, so we're going to try and get one an inch thick, just so that we've got a lot of material that we can turn away on the lathe, just so that we've got a lot of waste to start with, so that it's more stable on the lathe, it doesn't break up. Okay, so we'll set the fence to 25mm and then we'll start making cuts so that we can have a pen blank at the end of it. There we have our pen blank. Okay, now that we have our pen blank cut to size, we need to lay our two brass tubes up against it, and we need to make sure some pen kits will have a top tube and a bottom tube. Other pen kits, it doesn't really matter which tube is which, but on this particular one there is a threaded end on one of the tubes, and that is for the nib of the pencil to screw into. So we need to make sure that when we're laying it against our blank, that we have this end at the bottom end of the blank. So we line the tubes up against the blank, and then we put a mark in the middle where we cut, right there. So we'll cut this in half now, and then once we've done that, it's ready to take to the lathe to bore the holes down the centre. One thing I forgot to mention is to make sure to put a mark down the length of the blank and to mark on side A and side B. This is so that you can keep the grain running as it should be. So before I cut where I marked, I drew that line and I marked A and B. So even when I take it to the lathe and I put a piece down and pick up another one, I'll always be able to line the grain up perfectly. Okay, so here we have part A of the blank in the pen jaws on my scroll chuck. I like to bore the holes down the blanks on the lathe rather than using a drill press, as it helps guarantee that the hole will be bored all the way down the centre. On a drill press it's easy to be a mill or two off of centre, which makes turning on the lathe a bit more difficult. So I have in my drill chuck in the tailstock an 11mm drill bit, and we'll go ahead and bore the hole down in part A. Okay, that's us through the first one. Pull the drill bit out of the way. Take part A out, and you can see hole nicely down there. And move the drill bit back into position. And we'll bore this one as well. There we go. Now we have our two blanks ready to glue the brass barrels into. Right, so we have part A and part B, and we have our brass tube that has the threads on the inside. I think you can just make that out. So we want to make sure that the part with the threads is going to be in the bottom of A. And for gluing in the brass tubes, I use Gorilla Glue, which is a medium CA glue. And I learned the hard way that it's best to wear gloves when working with CA glue. The first time I did this, I ended up gluing my fingers together, which is never fun. So the barrels that you get from Penkits Direct come already with a keyed surface, so you want to check your brass tubes to make sure that it has had some kind of abrasive gone over it, just to make sure that the glue has something to adhere to. If you have a smooth brass barrel, then just take some sandpaper and go over the outside of it just to rough the edge up, and that gives something to allow the glue to adhere to it. So you just want to put a little bit of glue along the tube like this, smear it all around. This edge here has the threads. You want to put it in and twist it, put it in and out, twisting the barrel in. That helps to spread the glue around so that there's glue on every surface of it. And then at the very end you want to push it to make sure that the brass tube finishes inside the wood, so that you've got a mill or two that you can trim off with the barrel trimmer. You can wipe off any excess CA on the outside. You do that for both. You let that dry. It'll take about 5 or 10 minutes just to make sure that it has dried sufficiently. Once you're happy enough that the CA has dried, then you need to trim the ends of your blanks down to the barrel so that you have a nice 90-degree face for the parts of the pen to butt up against, so that you have a nice crisp edge. So the way that we do that is using a barrel trimmer. This is a universal barrel trimmer. The one that I got has a 7, 8, 9 and 10 mil guide with a fluted end just to follow down the brass tube, and this cutting edge flushes the end of the blank to the length of the brass tube. This one is 10 mil that I have fitted, but it's an 11 mil brass tube. So I've wrapped some insulating tape around that just to take the wobble out of the brass tube, so I can make sure that I have a 90-degree edge finished up against the brass barrel. So put that in a drill, you just slide it in and slowly take a bit off and check it. You don't want to go too far, or you end up shaving off the length of the brass tube, and then that can affect how the pen goes together. So you can see there a nice polished edge on the brass tube and a nice flat finish on the wood as well. You do that for the 4 sides. There you can see the 4 edges, a nice flush edge right up to the brass. That's ready now to be mounted in the mandrel on the lathe. Okay, so here we have a universal pen mandrel mounted in the spindle of my lathe. So the first thing you want to do is put some spacer bushings on. These are 7mm bushings that came with the mandrel. Then you want to put your first bushing that comes with your pen kit on. Well, it doesn't come with your pen kit, you have to buy it separately. But this is the bushings for the workshop pen kit. Again, I got this from Pen Kits Direct. So you slide it on next. Then your first blank, part A, it slides on. The bushings are important for 2 reasons. The small edge of the bushing fits inside the brass tube so that the blank is kept parallel with the mandrel. It's not going to wobble about on you. And the large side of the bushing is your finished diameter. So once you've got that on and you start turning, you want to turn away the waste wood down so that it's flush with that bushing. So you put the first one on, then the middle section goes on, make sure it's pushed inside the barrel, then your second section, and you want to make sure that the markings that you put on match up so that you know that the grain is running as it should. Then finally your last kit bushing, it goes inside. And then you want to put on a few more spacing bushings up to the thread of your mandrel. On there. And then you want to close that off. Tighten that down so that these are fixed and they're not going to spin independently of the lathe. Once that's nice and tight, slide your tailstock up, lock it down and put just a little pressure on it. And that will keep the mandrel nice and straight. And we're ready to turn. I'm going to start this by roughing it into round using a 3/8 spindle gouge. Once I've got it into a nice cylinder, I'll switch to a skew and I'll start to plane it down to a smooth curve, bringing it down to the edges of the bushing so that it's going to be a nice uniform fit when it comes to assembling the pen. Bring your tool rest in so it's nice and close, and then start bringing it to round to make sure that it can turn freely. Okay, that's us turned down to the bushings now. can see that there's one or two little points where the nuts, as the wood is dried, have cracked, but we'll be able to stabilise that with a bit of CA glue in there, just to act as a gap filler and to seal that off and to stop that getting any worse. But before we do that, there is a part on this mechanism at the end here, a hexagonal nut that goes on the end. So what we need to do now is take the measurement of how wide that is and cut off of here, exposing the brass barrel at the end of the blank for that to sit over. The purpose of the hexagonal nut is that when it's sitting on a bench or table, it's not going to roll around. It will sit on one of the flat edges of the hexagonal nut and it will stay where it should, so it doesn't roll away and get lost. So we'll take this measurement, we'll mark it, and we'll cut that off now. Okay, what we'll do now is we'll give that a sand to prepare it for the finish. And I'll sand it starting at 150 grit and I'll sand it up to 800 grit. Sanding is pretty boring, so we'll fast forward now and you can come back once I'm ready to put some oil on it. Okay, both these blanks now are sanded to 800, and for the last two grits, 600 and 800, I applied oil to the blank and then wet sanded with the oil just to give it a smoother finish and to fill any of the little cracks. The oil will help the dust go into any voids that are in the wood and fill those to give a nice clean smooth finish. So what we're going to do now is apply CA glue as our top coat finish, and the CA glue I use for this is Titebond. This is a thin CA, so I'm going to be putting about 20 coats of CA onto these. I'll show you the first 2 or 3 coats and then we'll skip on to polishing up, but I'll show you the process I go through first. So to begin with, I prepare little bits of paper towel like this, and what I'll do is I take some oil. I have just finishing oil, and I'll put oil onto the paper towel, and I'll put oil onto the wood. Then I take my CA and I apply it to the paper towel, and then I rub it on while I'm spinning the wood. The reason I put oil on it first is it acts as a curing agent, so it will speed up the curing time of the CA. Give that a little moment to dry. Then add more oil to a new bit of paper towel each time. Rub that on while rotating it. Then again applying CA to the paper towel and rubbing that on. Being sure to smooth out the glue each time so that it takes away any ridges. Okay. So I'll repeat this process as I said, about 20 times, just to make sure that I've got a nice thick coat of CA glue on the wood before we polish it up. If we don't have enough CA on, then while we're polishing it, it's quite easy to polish through the layer of CA, and you'll have dull spots in your finish, which you don't want. So it's better to add more CA just at the start. Okay, we're now at a stage where we have 20 coats of CA glue on our pen blanks, which means we're ready now to polish. And we'll polish these using micro mesh pads. These pads come in a set of 9, ranging from grits of 1500 all the way through to 12,000. So this will leave us with a nice polished surface at the end. So to start with, we'll start at the very end with the 1500 grit, and for the first 2 or 3 pads we'll spend a bit more time taking out any bumps and ridges that are in the glue. We don't want to spend too long, or we run the risk of polishing all the way through the CA, but we want to make sure that we take out all those rough bits so that we're left with a nice smooth surface. And with the higher grits, it's just a case of going over, removing the scratches and finishing with a nice polished edge. So we'll dip this in water just to help lubricate the pad, and we'll start polishing. Finally, just take a paper towel, wet it with water and go over it just to remove any things that might be left on it. Okay, now we're ready for assembly. Now that we've finished polishing our 2 pen blanks, we're ready to assemble the pencil mechanism. To do that, we'll take our lower barrel. This is the threaded end, so we want to place the centre band in the opposite end to the thread. And I don't have a pen press, so I'll be doing this with a small hand clamp. So you just want to position it in the centre of that and slowly press it in, making sure that it goes in straight. So here we have the centre band pushed into the first part of the lower barrel. You can see that we have a nice crisp edge. See if we can get it into focus. We have a nice crisp edge between the wood and the centre band. Next we want to take the upper part of the pen and press that onto the other end of the centre band. I'm going to use a slightly bigger hand clamp for this. So I have the 2 parts lined up, and then just slowly press it into position. And again you can see that it's met perfectly around the centre band. Next we want to take our hexagonal nut and place that over the brass end. it just pushes into place. Again, a lovely crisp finish around there, flush with the end of the brass barrel as well. Now the pencil mechanism simply screws into the threaded end like that. Finally, you have your press mechanism, and threaded onto the end of there is this. This is the sharpener. So what you want to do is put a little bit of CA glue on the end of this, and that glues onto the end of the brass tube on the internal mechanism. This is the plunger so that you can discharge the lead. But you want to glue this on so that this can then screw off and allow you the sharpener. I'll use some medium CA glue, the same CA glue that I use for gluing the brass barrels into the pen blanks, and you just put a small amount on the inside of here. And push it on. Just hold it there for a few seconds. As I'm holding that there, I'll let you have a look at the wood. You can see it's got a lovely shiny finish with the CA and beautiful grain with the burr as well. There's some really nice detail with the knots and the swirl in the grain as well. It's come out really well. So you can see when you push the plunger, that opens the grasp at the end, and you're able to slide your graphite in there. There you have a finished workshop sketch pencil. I hope you enjoyed this little project. If you did, hit the like button and leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your feedback. If you're a subscriber, thank you for your support. And if you haven't subscribed already, please do so you don't miss out on future videos. Thanks for watching.